People We Meet on Vacation is going to be read very differently than something like 100 Years of Solitude. It doesn't come as a surprise that depending on the type of book you're reading, your annotation style should be different. I think a lot of the book annotations we see online, particularly those on Bookstagram and maybe TikTok, Book Talk, are kind of unrealistic, and they only show a very polished and clean side of what annotating a book looks like. And while sometimes you can actually create very pretty annotations, a lot of the time it doesn't make sense, it's not realistic, and it doesn't actually help you read any better. So I'm going to show you 10 different ways I annotate, starting from the most simple going to the most complex, and I'll leave timestamps so that you can skip around. So we're going to start off with People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This book I didn't annotate. So that's the first kind of annotation you can do. It's actually the opposite, right? You can just not annotate. There are a lot of reasons you wouldn't want to annotate a book. For example, if you're borrowing a book from someone, you definitely don't want to write on it. Or if you're just reading something for fun and there's no reason for you to stop every so often and make a note when you really just want to experience the story as a whole. So the genres I tend to not annotate are contemporary fiction, particularly contemporary romance, where I'm just there for the story. I don't see a reason to be searching for themes or trying to analyze it. I'm just having fun. This might be completely different for you. I've seen some people who annotate their romance novels like crazy, and it looks beautiful, and they get more out of it that way. But for me, romance novels or contemporary romance novels aren't what I'm going to annotate. Instead, it's going to be something like a classic novel. Also, I read this book on the train, and it would have been really annoying to have all of my annotation supplies spread out all over the train. I was just, trying to pass the time while I was getting somewhere. But what if you can't write in a book, but you still want to annotate it? So something like a library book. This is similar to not annotating, but you still want to write something down. For example, when I was reading Stranger by Camus, there were a lot of quotes, particularly in the second half of the book, that I really wanted to remember. So the way I annotate something like this is by creating a note on my phone in the Notes app and using voice dictation to read out the quotes I really like. I also typed out the words that I didn't know, as I do for all of my books, and that gets added to a Quizlet deck, which I later study to expand my vocabulary. If you want to learn more about how I expand my vocabulary by reading, leave a comment and I'll make a video about it. Another option for library books or borrowed books is to take photos of pages and passages that you enjoy. I personally don't prefer this, even though I do it sometimes, because it takes up storage on my phone, or more storage on my phone, and they kind of get lost in my camera roll. When you take a photo, you don't know exactly which part of the photo is the text that you're looking for. You can use the highlight function to mark it up, but I just don't tend to go back through my camera roll looking for quotes. I tend to prefer having it typed up somewhere. Then I can paste it to a Google Doc, print it out, whereas I'm not going to print out the photos I've taken on my phone. However, if that works for you, perhaps you keep a folder in your camera roll of all the photos of books that you've read. That could be a good idea. Also, you can just handwrite the quotes that you like. I have right here a notebook that I got years ago. It's from The Economist, and I just keep notes on books that I've read in here. So here are the notes I took from The Stranger. I actually do this even if I've annotated a book a different way, just because I have trouble retaining what I read. So by writing it down, writing my thoughts and feelings in a notebook, that's a way that you can annotate every single one of your books if you'd like. Alright, so the next level up would be very light pencil annotating. For example, what I've done here in Giovanni's room. This was one of the first books I decided to write in. That's why it's so sparse. I was actually afraid to use pen or do more than just underlining in pencil, but it turned out really well because I can actually just flip through the book and find the passages that I've starred, lines that I've really liked, and even though there's no color or extra notes, it's much better than just having a blank book. If I were to reread this book, I would probably go a little more crazy and write all over it, post-it, scribble on it, because I really love this book. It was a 5-star read for me, and there would be more I'd want to explore with it, but it makes such a difference just to point out the passages and quotes that you like in terms of going back, being able to discuss the book, being able to retain the book. And that's for me what's most important, being able to remember what I've read and remember the parts that stuck out to me. It's also a little less personal, so if you are going to be giving this book to friends, perhaps, then they don't have to read your, innermost thoughts just because you've written all over your book. So they can kind of I wonder why that she underlined that passage or something like that. So it's a little more subtle. You can also combine methods, so if you're underlining in pencil or pen in the book, you can also be putting them onto your notes app on your phone or taking pictures of it and sharing them with your friends. You can do a lot of different things that don't require extremely heavy annotating. I think there are so many benefits to not annotating. You save a lot of time, you can really flow through the story without interruption, and if you're hesitant to write all over your books, then it's a great option for you. Another pretty harmless way of annotating is just tabbing. So here's The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I absolutely love this book, and it worked perfectly for me to just use tabs for this book. Perhaps if I read it a second time, I might underline some of my key and favorite lines, but that honestly wasn't that necessary because these tabs usually just bring me straight to those lines. And the tabs are color-coded, so I could just flip to all the blue tabs, which mean that it's a sad scene, and I could revisit all the sad moments and get extremely sad. I did also copy some of my favorite quotes from this book into my notebook here, so it's kind of a mixture of things going on. By the way, not every book makes it into this notebook. Some books that I don't have many profound thoughts on, I don't bother writing stuff down about, such as People We Meet on Vacation, but I did have some thoughts besides I love this book for The Song of Achilles, so I did write some things in this notebook as well. So again, combining methods, you don't have to do too much. This isn't particularly aesthetic, it's just rainbow tabs. It's just for me, but it really works. This next method isn't so much a method as just a reminder that you don't have to keep annotating if it doesn't make sense. You can see that I have here the Giver Quartet. I absolutely love the Giver, so that's the first book in the series, and then I just didn't like the next three as much, so there just aren't as many tabs, and that's the end of the story. I tabbed things that I thought were interesting in the Giver, and then there were a couple interesting things in the next story, none in the third, and then the fourth has one tab. So it's totally fine if you just realize you don't want to annotate a book and you stop halfway. Also, I only used one colored tab for each book, so you don't have to color code your tabs if it doesn't make sense. I have a ton of books, especially nonfiction, where I just use one color tab to mark things that I want to revisit. So we're halfway through the video. The first 5 methods I showed you were pretty innocuous, right? They're not going to permanently change your book, except for, well, not if you're using pencil, actually. So none of these methods so far are really putting much of a mark on your book. If that's your preference, then those are the 5 different methods for you that you can play around with. Basically writing things in places not on the book. Pretty self-explanatory, but I think it's a good reminder that that's a perfectly fine way to annotate a book. So the next 5 methods are going to be much more in-depth. We're going to start with what I call the pen in hand or pencil in hand method. It's a permanent way of changing your book, but it doesn't require much planning or much extra time. You literally just read with a pen in your hand. So in terms of supplies, right here I think it's called the Zebra Sarasa Clip pens. I got a set of these different colors, and I just read the first couple chapters of this book with this pen in my hand. This is, for example, what a page would look like. I underline things that stand out to me. I always circle words that I don't know if I'm going to be writing in a book. Otherwise, I type into my phone. I put boxes around proper nouns, so things that I'll probably need to recall later. And then as I read, I develop a tabbing system because every book is different, so I don't know what tabs I'm going to need until I'm partially through the book. So I noticed a theme of memory in this book, so I created a memory tab, and I started tabbing the moments where I saw that theme. I also usually will just have a tab for favorite quotes because it makes sense to me to tab those. I highlighted my favorite quotes in this case, but that's kind of overkill. You just need the pen or the tab to do that. And then this was a tiny bit of an extra step. At the end of the chapter, I just wrote out some thoughts I had and some characters that we met so I could clarify things for myself. But really, the basis of this method is just read with a pen in your hand, write comments and questions as you go. It shouldn't take too much time beyond reading the actual book because you're not stopping too much to write things down as you're going. You're just kind of commenting very brief notes or underlining. So yeah, this is probably the simplest way to read in a way that's active and actually be writing in your book. I like to call this next method Make It Messy because I want to remind you that annotation does not have to be pretty. I read this book with no plans of making a Bookstagram account or sharing my annotations. I used pencil, I wrote sloppily, I circled messily. Sometimes I used a straight edge to underline, sometimes I didn't. And, I have stuff all over it. I use my color-coded tab system based on emotions. and I just kind of scribbled all over this book. So this is a little bit of a step up from the write or read with the pen in your hand method, because I was also reading with tabs in my hand, and then also when I was done with the book, I flipped through every single page, and I went over all the things that I had highlighted or underlined and selected before, and I highlighted my favorite quotes. The only reason I did this is because this is my new favorite book of all time, 100 Years of Solitude. So it made sense for me to go back and kind of re-experience the book through my favorite passages. I absolutely love the Song of Achilles, and I did flip through some of my tabs again, but I didn't feel the need to revisit the prose the same way that I felt the need to revisit 100 Years of Solitude. So again, it really depends on the book you're reading. If perhaps this book connected with me even more, I would have gone through it a second time and looked at all the green tabs and maybe written on the book then. But I didn't feel the need to. But I absolutely felt the need to do this with 100 Years of Solitude. I felt the need to reread it as soon as I finished it. So that's why I went back and added more. So this is kind of a step up. I'm building onto what I've already showed you. This next method is a way to annotate your books in a very detailed way, but without actually writing on your books. So for example, I have the Master and Margarita. The reason I'm not writing in this book is because it's just too beautiful. I feel bad if I wrote in it. However, there's so many characters, the plot is kind of crazy, and it's a classic, which usually means that I want to do more analysis with it, so I needed a way to annotate it without actually writing in the book. So what I've done is I've put at the beginning of the book some index cards with characters that I fill out as I read. As soon as I'm introduced to a new character, I write down their name and the page number that they're introduced. I also created this card that just has some things to think about while I'm reading, because as I read the introduction of the book, there were some themes that were introduced that I wanted to keep an eye out for. And then lastly, I just have a tab color key. It's the same tab system. Right now I only have 3 colors. Orange is for important, green is for funny, and blue is for sad. And instead of writing in the margins or underlining as I read, I write on a Post-it any thoughts that I have, just like that, and I write the page number next to it to substitute for actually writing on the page. So this is what I'm doing. Ooh. So much for not destroying the book, right? Just crease that page. So the Post-its are what I do while I read. I try to stick them at the end of the chapter as to not cover the text. And then when I'm done with the chapter, because I really want to retain this book, I write a chapter summary on a large index card. And then on the back, I add questions or analysis or anything. I also sometimes add a doodle based on something in the chapter. For example, here's my summary of chapter 9. Here's some questions I had from the chapter, and then here's a drawing of the borscht that was in that chapter, as well as the quote that goes along with it. That's just for fun. I do think a lot of the time the beauty of classics are in the details and the things that are not just plot points, so that's why I have been drawing an image that sticks out to me most from the chapters. Overall, this is an extremely time-consuming way to annotate a book, because not only are you reading the chapter slowly, writing down all of your thoughts on a separate piece of paper, but then after the chapter, I'm writing a summary, interacting with it, asking questions, flipping back through the chapter, making sure I haven't missed any character names. I also have a PDF, online version of this to search for character names, because the Russian names are so confusing that I need to be able to do a word search for them. So yeah, it probably doubles the read time of reading this book, but I'm probably going to get more than double out of it. So that's how you can annotate a book without actually writing on it. This next method I call All About the Ideas, because I use it when I'm interacting with the ideas presented as opposed to the storyline. This works particularly well with nonfiction because there isn't a story to be remembering. Here we have Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke, and this is what my annotations looked like. I would highlight anything that stuck out to me and then write why. And then even when I didn't highlight something, I would put little summaries in the margins, because Rilke tends to be making some kind of argument. Even though it's letters and it's informal, there are multiple points he makes throughout each letter, and I want to keep track of them. So that's just what I'm writing in the side. No color coding necessary. I could color code if I wanted on a second read, because there are themes of solitude and love and art and God that I might want to examine on a second time around. But when I was reading this for the first time, I only felt the need to mark parts that stuck out to me and leave little summaries on the side. If you didn't want to write in a book like this, you could also do this in a Google Doc. I can imagine taking notes from nonfiction working really well just in a bullet point format, online or handwritten notes in a notebook. The main difference here is that it's a lot more frequent, the annotations I'm making, because I'm trying to summarize as I go, and I'm also interacting with the ideas, so it's not about writing summaries at the end for me, although I do have some short summaries. It's more about, do I agree, do I disagree, what connections can I draw, there's no color needed, things like that. Alright, the last type of annotation I call the full monty. It's when you're going to destroy the book that you're reading. You're going to do everything that I already mentioned. So I have here Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë, and I'm reading this book for a book club. So that's one of the reasons why I'm really going all in with this book. It's also because it's a classic that I've always wanted to read, and I know I'll get a lot more out of it if I take my time with it and if I annotate it like crazy. So it's about as time consuming as this one, except it's writing on the book, so it might be a tiny bit faster. So we're combining all of the strategies I already talked about with this book. I'm reading with this pen in my hand. I'm also reading with this pen in my hand to put boxes around the proper nouns, so color coding a little bit. I'm also reading with this highlighter in my hand to highlight quotes that stand out to me. I'm reading with these tabs at the ready for categories that I determine as I'm reading. Right now I only have one, which is foreshadowing. I have 2 bookmarks in this book because this one is holding my place and this one is holding where the endnotes are. I also introduced a 3rd color for observations that other people in the book club make that I want to note down, just so I can remember that it was someone else's idea. This is totally unnecessary, but I'm using a different pen when I write on my post-its. And my method is to read with this pen in my hand, underlining anything that stands out to me, writing comments anytime I have a thought, writing questions, circling all the words that I don't know. There were a ton of words that I wasn't super familiar with on this page. And then when I reached the end of the chapter, I filled up all the white space I could. So I wrote questions and comments from that chapter. This is a post-it summarizing the chapter. On the back, I used a clear post-it and I didn't like it. It is more questions I had. And at the front of the chapter, I write in the orange pen the proper nouns that I found within that chapter so that I can reference perhaps when a character gets introduced, and it's an easy way to keep track of characters and places. For chapter 2, I ran out of space. There wasn't any white space, so I have post-its, and I try not to block the text as much as I can, so I've folded them up and shoved them at the bottom. So this is a summary. These are questions I had. I actually had another one for questions in the middle of the book here. So this is going all out. This is probably the most I could possibly do with annotations. So I'm going to summarize the 10 different ways that I mentioned. Hopefully I'm going to remember the order. So first of all, you can annotate nothing because some books are just meant to be enjoyed. Next, you can annotate in a separate location so as to not write on a borrowed book. You can also annotate with just pencil. You can annotate with just tabs. You can try annotating and then give up. You can annotate with a pen in your hand. You can do a serious annotation without writing a single thing on the actual book. You can annotate to interact with the ideas. You can annotate like no one's watching and go back and annotate it again. And then you can annotate everything. You can annotate as much as you possibly can because you want to squeeze everything out of a book. So I hope this helped. Please leave comments, questions, and suggestions for me, and I will read all of them. Please let me know if there's anything you'd like to see from me, or if you want me to go more in depth with any of this, but I hope this provided a good overview of different ways to annotate and why it's important to consider the book that you're reading when you're annotating, because different books require different styles of annotation, and that's completely personal to you, because what I want to annotate the most heavily might be what you want to not annotate at all. Alright, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.